Afternoon, everyone. We are here with James and Lynette Gillette in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. And we're going to be talking about another episode of Dyslexia Success, which is really focused on can we do more than just do accommodations or compensations or strategies? What if we could actually take weaker skills and make them stronger? And so we're happy to have James and his mother tell us their own story of empowering not just dyslexia, but other developmental difficulties like language disorders, ADHD, or even sensory motor difficulties. So Lynette and James, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to meet you as well.
So, yes, we are glad to be a part of the Dyslexia Success Stories because James is indeed one of those. Having been diagnosed with genetic dyslexia, several of specific learning disorders, mathematics, writing, written expression, reading, language disorder, social pragmatic communication disorder, and developmental disorder with motor function. So it is a journey of faith that James went to the Morris Center and he is who he is today. And I think that we're here to tell that story.
Fantastic. And just to be clear for our viewers and listeners, so it was more than 6 years ago that James came to the Morris Center in Trinidad and Tobago. So why don't we first start with just a little bit of recap, Lynette, of what you recall of James's struggles from birth to age 10, because it was around 10 years of age that he came to the Morris Center, and just kind of give us the parents' perspective, just as a synopsis of what were some of the struggles. And I know one of the famous phrases that I think you so eloquently point out is that you were told there's nothing more that can be done to help change James's skills. And with that background, I'll let you just kind of give us your recollection of the first 10 years of life.
So very early on in preschool, Auntie Wendy, bless her soul, of the Children Montessori School, brought to our attention that James was having issues with fine motor skills. So she would bring clothes clips for him to use to try to develop the fine motor skills. Now, James is extremely intelligent, so the grades were fine, everything else was fine. Going into primary school, Miss Pamela Marchak, who was actually trained by you, brought it to our attention that, look, there seems to be some challenges. And we took James to be diagnosed, to be assessed. And he was put in a program under Donella Rodriguez and Natasha Scott, where he stayed for a year. And they were his speech and language pathologists. Mm-hmm. And James did very well. But at that point, he's around the age of, I would say, about 8 years old. And there were many different challenges. And so that's when we were told, well, there's nothing else. Now, let me be very clear on this. There are services that can be obtained in Trinidad and Tobago, but not all in one place. There's no holistic place like the Morris Center here. And there, at that time, so we were advised that perhaps we could take James abroad, and the Morris Center was actually recommended, mm-hmm. and one of the locations in Florida, and let them work with him for a period of time. Now it would have been at least 6 months, and the cost would have been prohibitive to us, in addition to which US dollars are very hard to come by.
Yes.
So at that time, we are debating, well, what can we do? Mm-hmm. And looking for options. And, sometimes we turn to prayer as well. And that is what we also did. And interestingly enough, James's journey is a journey of faith, because not long after, I saw an advertisement on Facebook. And the house is 5 minutes from where we live. And there was a banner saying the Morris Center. So I called, and Natasha Scott answered the phone and said, we have a list here the Morris Center has opened in Trinidad. And that was an answer to our prayer, because the difficulties that James had been having They got worse over time simply because if you do not deal with something, then as the schoolwork gets more difficult, the challenges are seen. So James was in about grade 2 at the time in
Hmm.
in a private primary school, and we were seeing a drop in the grades. You want to talk a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, the drop in the grades is mainly due to the fact that I couldn't really put stuff together. Some stuff I could understand pretty well, others not so much. Which that's one of the reasons why the grades dropped, and I was generally kind of struggling with understanding or answering some questions, and I was just feeling frustrated with them.
Yeah, and James, just to clarify, that was understanding when it was verbal instructions, and as to also even when it was written instructions, whether it was verbal or written, that was a comprehension was difficult, or was it just when it was verbal?
It was, I would say, a mix of both.
Okay.
So Miss Simone Patek, who was James's math teacher, come forward, would send me a little message saying James didn't do so well in the assessment. Maybe we can have him do it over. And the messaging was there, and James was getting a little bit depressed because when you are not doing well, it's a reflection on things overall. So, I want to see.
Yeah, I just felt really frustrated with it because I found I wasn't really doing well. All the other kids were doing fine, and I was just wondering how come I'm the only one who's just not understanding it.
Hmm.
It was just really frustrating for me to deal with.
Which can be a challenge of being a really intelligent young man, and you can recognize that you're not learning at the rate that your classmates are. And we could choose to tell you, well, your brain works differently and you're going to have other skills. Or we could say, well, let's figure out why you're struggling and what could we do to make those weaker skills stronger. That was kind of part of the journey I think that your mom was on, because that's the best way to give you the best chance to excel at your true potential.
Well, from the time we saw the Morris Center advertisement, we signed James up immediately. And I think that was a major, major turning point in his life. James enjoyed his time so much here that he didn't want to leave at the end of the 2 terms.
You're going to become a long-term student, James. Is that it?
Yeah, I didn't want to go back to normal school. I was like, no, no, I want to go back.
And tell us a little bit about that. Why do you think that was? Why did you feel so much happier and so much more connected to staying at a clinic like the Morris Center, where your weaker skills were getting stronger?
Well, I would say one of the factors was the people who were helping me, and because the atmosphere as well, because it was very relaxed, calm, and I enjoyed talking with many of the people who are helping me,
Mhm.
and it was an overall enjoyable time for me. And that's one of the reasons I didn't want to leave because I found I would just miss that. Yes.
And what about your skills? Did you notice anything that was changing about your skills? Because you would have been doing OT first, and we're doing OT 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, sometimes 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, to build stronger fine motor skills, or visual perceptual skills, or visual plus motor skills, or body coordination skills, because all of those skills also impact your ability to perform at your potential in academic, in social, and in leisure activities or even sports. Do you remember what was changing over time as you first began working at the Morris Center?
I noticed like there were small improvements, and over time, stuff became, I'd say, a lot easier for me to do. Due to some of the fine motor skills I was doing a lot better, and it was an overall being help, and yeah, everything was slowly improving, and over time, I found it to get a lot easier communication, writing, visualizing images. It got a lot easier for me to do.
Fantastic. And just out of curiosity, because not many kids in Trinidad and even in the States see a true sensory integration OT gym. Do you remember the first time you saw the gym, what you might have thought of that?
When I first saw the gym, I was like, oh, "Wow, I've never seen this before. This is really interesting." Because I didn't know that they even had this. Yeah, So I was more surprised, and I was really curious about it. About the first time I saw it.
Fantastic. And do you remember what you did in the gym? Because one of the real unique challenges of sensory integration focused, high intensity, high frequency OT is many times it may seem like you're just climbing on equipment in a gym, or you're just swinging on a swing, or they're giving you a challenge of what to do with a ball in your hand, trying to hit a target while you're swinging on a swing, which from the OT's perspective, they went to university for 6 years to understand just the basic parts of the different parts of the body's input system. And every human brain has 8 input systems. It's got visual, auditory, touch, taste, and smell. Those are the 5 senses we all learn about in elementary school or beginning primary school. But then OTs also know there's vestibular, which is, your body balance system. There's proprioception, which is your awareness of your body in space. And there's interoception, which is your internal awareness of your energy level, your mood, your awareness of what you're doing, hunger, toileting needs. All of those 8 systems together are what really then build these upper level skills. So the OTs, what you may not have known, James, is they're changing the equipment based on which of those 8 systems they're trying to get more input into neurologically, which helps the brain make new wiring. So go ahead. Just curious about what activities you can recall even doing in an OT gym, if any. It's been about 6 years, right?
Remember doing obstacle courses that we had a thing we would climb up on and had like several layers which we would climb through. Remember falling
The
through
spandex.
that at least a couple of times. There was also the zip line thing which would hang on to ball pit and a bunch of other different stuff. I can remember. Those are the main ones I remember.
Fantastic.
No, we saw a very dramatic improvement in the fine motor skills early on because James was a Cub Scout at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what scouts do is tie knots. And for the life of him, James could not tie a knot starting out. And then we saw the improvement. Now, he's still a scout and he still struggles sometimes. The bowling is not his friend, but he has made dramatic progress through the years in understanding that like the spatial skills are not that great and the fine motor skills have improved considerably. And that is testament, I think, to a lot of what you all would have done with him back then.
True, because we work from those fine motor skills and then to those coordination skills and then to those visual skills. And then they start putting the two together, visual plus fine motor skills, because those are essential for you to be able to copy from the board down onto paper. Or visual plus fine motor skills are important to be able to look at graphs or charts in a textbook and be able to understand what the graph or chart is showing, comprehend it, and be able to make some notes about it to help with your studies and your learning. But I know James also competes in other sports. And James, do you have any recollection of these improved sensory motor skills helping you be better able to compete in sports? Because many people don't know, but universities actually send us top tier athletes to the Moore Center who aren't able to excel in their sport in all areas of it. And we actually put them in the same OT gym that you went in, James, and they might be 21 years old or 24 years old, and they still can have skills that they're trying to enhance, improve, and strengthen.
Well, one of these sports I think that would fall under is, say, air rifle, because one thing with it too is it requires a lot of concentration, focus, and some patience too. Because with air rifle, when you're shooting, you can't just pull the trigger and move the gun because the pellet will go off target. You have to stand there for a couple seconds, which for some people is pretty hard to do because you just want to shoot and then reload and then you shoot again. Because many people's minds when it comes down the shooting sport, you just shoot off and no. So just that you have to be precise, you have to be accurate, you have to be patient. And if you feel like the rifle's kind of wobbling, you have to let it down and try again. It requires quite a lot of patience to be able to do that.
And we have a sheriff's deputy who's listening to you talk, and he wants to chime in and say, we call that shooting sequence.
It is, yes.
He himself is also an expert marksman. So I think Deputy Agata can appreciate what you're saying there, James. And now, how about just your ability to focus and your breathing and your awareness of your body? How important is that to rifle and competing in rifle?
Well, one of the things with the breathing bit too is what they teach you is when you have the rifle off, you kind of hold your breath so it straightens, and then when you pull the trigger, hold it for 5 seconds, then you exhale so you can, then you just put it down and and you do that again.
Fantastic. And how well did you compete in your sport in rifle? Have you
I
made any?
was, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was the youngest shooter in 2019 for air rifle, and I've won several trophies. Now I've not been able to participate as much because of school and some other stuff, but I'm get wanting to get back into it. I find it enjoyable and fun. I've made friends with quite a lot of the people there.
We saw a dramatic improvement because of the OT in the hand-eye coordination, which is required for any type of shooting.
Yes.
And that is not easy to come by in a lot for just no generally people with no issues. So it was interesting to observe that. And James does follow the protocols, as your deputy talked about the shooting sequence. And it again, it is testament to the training that he's able to do this, because an air rifle may not seem like much, but some of them are very heavy, and you're holding that for a long time, because when you compete, you have, whether it's 6 or 10 at a time, and you have to focus, and then you have 3 rounds to go. So it's not just you're firing on one target,
Right.
and
Right.
that takes a lot of focus, a lot of concentration, and a lot of coordination.
And Deputy Agata's chiming in again there, James, saying that
Yes, nice.
that you rock, and that learning to read with the Now program also helped him improve his sequencing skills better. Because what he's talking about there is, as you improve that phonological system, you improve your ability to hold on to words and use words, to think and to reason and problem solve. And as you improve the imagery, which is more of a right hemisphere function, you improve the ability to visualize what you want to see yourself doing in the sequence you want to do it, and with what precision. So it's a linguistic and an imagery system working together, even for sports like rifle. And developmentally, Mom, what did you see happening as that time went on? We know we went to Morris Center around age 10. We saw some of these sensory motor skills developing. One of his early diagnoses was also a language disorder, which meant he
Yes.
struggled to get words out or struggled to comprehend what was said to him. How did that change over time?
Well, in our system in Trinidad and Tobago, we have SEA, Secondary Entrance Assessment. And one of the heavily weighted components of SEA is called creative writing. And in creative writing, they give you an essay, like whether it's a report or a story or whatever, and you have to write. Now, James had challenges with the language part of things to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And what you all did for him, which was very interesting, is so when in our system, when they do creative writing, you make a plan. Like if it's a mountain plan, so you have the start and you have your conclusion and you have your bits in between. And what you all taught James to do that served him well and continues to do so is to make a movie, the visual part of it. So you actually took that language and translated it a different way. And I think that enabled James to make significant strides where language is concerned because of the method that you taught him.
And James, what your mom's talking about is, we have scientists who decades before I was involved in brain scientists, and I'm a published brain scientist in neuroimaging. I'm a published brain scientist in neurorehabilitation. I'm a published brain scientist in dyslexia prevention and dyslexia remediation. And folks before even my career studied the brain and realized there's two main language systems. One is part linguistics and words, which is the left hemisphere, and the other is part imagery, which is the right hemisphere. And you want words to be able to be created into, you want images to be able to be converted into words, which means you've thought of an idea you want to express to somebody verbally. And if you struggle to express that idea verbally, then there's no way you're ready to actually do it in writing. So we practice that skill with you verbally first, of making a movie and talking about it, making a movie and talking about it, or reading and making a movie and then talking about it, or listening and making a movie and talking about it. And then we took that over to writing. What do you realize, or what do you remember about those imagery or movie making skills changing for you over time?
And with that, I would say it's helped like significantly when it comes to writing, especially in English now, where we're having to write essays, reports. It's become a lot easier to write it, and I don't really need to like do a plan per se, since I just do a movie in my head, kind of run through it, what I need to add in and stuff. And yeah, I can write it now. It's become significantly easier to be able to do that, and I just do it automatically without realizing sometimes. I just do it. So yeah, it's been a very crucial skill for me, I would say.
Fantastic. And part of what we do in the ways to actually take a weaker language skill and make it stronger is you have to practice it so much that it just becomes automatic. Now, when you hear words, the movie's there. Your decision now is, do I need to hold on to that movie and remember it long term? Or is it just kind of a fleeting thing that's really not important? It's just part of a friend to friend conversation, as opposed to this is something I need to know for an exam. The downside is you can actually be visualizing anything anybody says to you. And if mom tells you about an ailment your aunt has, you may not want the picture of the boil she has, because that might not be a very pleasant picture. But you've practiced imagery so much, those pictures should just be coming automatically. And that's what it sounds like you're describing. As you think of what you want to say, you make the movie, you're more better able to put down the words that build the movie in the reader's brain. And when your words build a very clear movie for the reader, that's what we call good writing, because it's very organized, it's very descriptive, and it conveys information very efficiently. If I said in a written sentence, I saw the thing by the place next to the stuff, that is a grammatically correct sentence. It has all the right parts of speech. It could have a capitalization and a period at the end. But the problem is it doesn't mean much. And what you are picturing versus what your mom is picturing may be completely different information, because what I said was too vague. But if I use more detailed nouns and adjectives and adverbs, and I said, I saw the small white poodle walking down the brown dirt road next to the green grassy field with an orange sunset in the background, now I've given you words that are much more picturesque, much more imagery related. And some people will say to us, well, I can't make movies. And that's perfectly fine. But guess what? Your brain has the capability to be trained how to make movies. And for some reason, and to my knowledge, no brain scientist in the world can answer this question. Why do some people automatically make movies and don't need this practice? And why do other people don't make movies at all and they're trying to literally remember the words you say, or remember the words they see on a book page, or remember the words that they saw on a sign? And that becomes too much for the brain to actually hold on to. Whereas that old cliche of a picture is worth 1,000 words, a movie's worth 1,000,000. It's actually very true.
Yes, that's extremely interesting. One of the things that I think James benefited from significantly at the Morris Center as well, I'm not sure how we all did it, but the ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So James went from not being able to focus in class, and then at the age of 12, playing a 4-hour classical chess game. James is currently under 18 Blitz chess champion, and he's number 70 in the hundreds of chess players in Trinidad and Tobago. He's ranked 70.
Fantastic.
And what's interesting is that at the age of 12, James could sit and focus and play not just one, but 2 4-hour games back to back on the same day, and possibly the next day as well, because usually nationals run like 7 rounds or 9 rounds. And I'm not sure what tools you all use there, Dr. Tim, but whatever it was, that certainly worked, and it made a huge difference. And James's success in chess as well is testament to that.
Well, here's one way that we know about how the brain works with attention. If we say the analogy of the brain is a car and it has a certain miles per gallon, well, a car going on a flattened road gets higher miles per gallon than a car going up a steep hill. Going up to, I forgot the name now, Queens Square, or going up to the hilltop where the fort is there.
Chancellor, Lady Chancellor.
Lady Chancellor, thank you.
Yeah.
That car is going to get less kilometers per kilometers per liter or miles per gallon. But if we make the imagery skills stronger, which means they're less effortful, they take less time, then it's kind of like the brain is no longer working uphill, which was burning the attentional fuel faster. Now the brain is more like the car going on the flat road. It takes less energy, it takes less effort. And like James said, it's not as hard anymore to come up with the ideas and do the creative writing. The other piece of that is, as OT can change visual perceptual skills and make them stronger, fine motor skills and make them stronger, and it becomes actually less effortful to do the actual writing part of the writing, what many people will call a dysgraphia or a impairment in sensory processing skills. Then the same thing happens. When you increase the efficiency of how the brain can do skills, you decrease the load or the drain on the attentional system. And so each skill that James strengthened at the Morris Center in Trinidad Tobago, he had better imagery skills for language, listening, and comprehension and speaking. He had better phonological processing for more efficient ability to sound out words, to read, sound out words to spell, and to store and retrieve words by sound. And then grammar and writing really teaches you the structure for the writing. As those skills kept getting stronger and stronger, all of them together now put less load on the brain and are more like the brain now is running at maximum efficiency. So it's what we call an indirect way to improve attention and focus, because sadly, many people don't understand that ADHD is really not a proper name of the difficulty. James has always had plenty of attention. He didn't lack attention. The challenge is not attention. The challenge is focus. Where are you putting the attention? So for the child who's more easily distracted visually, they'll see something and their attention shifts to what they just saw. And now they've lost focus on the teacher, and the focus is now on the shiny thing they saw out the window. And so they still have attention, but they're putting the attention in the wrong place, and they're struggling to maintain it where it needs to be. What you're describing is, one, James is a chess champion, and I think we have some trophies to show too, to back up the truth of James's finesse and expertise in chess. And Sheridan will go ahead and put that up on the photos while we're talking. Then he could sit and focus and really put his mind on those images and see that chessboard and stay maintaining that focus right on the chessboard. And that is because all of those systems of language and visual motor are working more efficiently. James, that's the brain scientist explanation. What would your explanation be as to why you got better at being able to sit and focus on tennis?
Well, I would say the Morris Center played a
Fine.
pretty
Yeah.
big role in that. Also, like over time, I learned to focus on specific things. Like if a teacher's talking, I'll focus on that and kind of blur out stuff that's happening in the background, like students getting noisy or speaking over the teacher. I'm going to kind of blur that out. Just kind of focus on what they're saying, because I know it's important for me to focus on that, because that's going to be important. Who knows? It could be something like a date for a test or homework. So I learned to focus on the specific bits rather than focus on just everything going on around. Because if I did that, then I would be pretty confused of what's going on, because my class is chaotic. So there'd be something happening over one corner, the other corner. So just focus on what's important for me to learn and for me to succeed. That was my main focus.
Fantastic. And do you think it was always that way? Was it that way when you were 8 or 7?
And when I was 8 or 7, I think it was a bit different than that, because I didn't really know how to focus on stuff. So I would get distracted by a lot of stuff around me.
Yeah. And here's an important point for me to share along with that question, because some people will say, well, he just needs another year of maturity. His brain's just not mature yet. And the brain's maturity, sure, it might happen a little bit as you age, but the real driving force behind the brain's maturity or how well it processes information is a neuroscience concept that we call experience-dependent neuroplasticity. And that means if you want the brain to build new wiring and make new skills and make the skills even stronger, you have to give the brain the practice to build those skills. And the practice has to happen in a very specific way. Foundational skills first, secondary skills next, third level skills next. It's a very systematic hierarchy, but it also has to happen with enough frequency, which in the Moore Center clinics and online with the Now programs and many other clinics, we want to see students practicing 5 days a week, because then you're firing that brain wiring, and the brain neurons that fire together begin to wire together and build that new wiring. And then we also want to have enough of the intensity of the practice, which means how much time per day. So all these pieces together are how the Moore Center is designed to help take weaker skills and make them much, much stronger. So then we get to a point where now it's just kind of automatic. Now, curiosity from me, James, are you at the age of driving in Trinidad? Is that coming soon?
Mm, July 31st.
Okay. So what skills does it take to be a driver?
Well, you have to have visual skills. You have to be pretty observant as well for other drivers on the road and for yourself, look out for obstacles. But you just need to be careful because you don't know like if there's a pothole up ahead or if there's water in it, how deep it is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you have to listen to because if you're like ambulance or police sirens, you know to move to the side. And if there's so yeah, those are some of the things that are required before driving.
And are those some of the skills that you actually worked on when you're at the Morris Center? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've worked on many skills that now you're going to use these skills for driving. But think back to what it might feel like. You've already started practicing driving, I assume. Got lessons happening.
Mm.
Yeah.
Not we can't say this openly, not officially, because in our country you get a learner's permit at 17. So
Okay.
James will be 17 at the end of July.
Okay.
But unofficially, yes, he can drive.
And if you think back to the first time you tried to do it, usually what happens is your whole attentional system is overwhelmed with where are my hands, where are my feet, what's around me. It could be an overwhelming experience to learn how to drive. But then what happens as you practice it, James? What happens to how much attention is consumed by just learning to drive? Do you think it demands more attention, demands less attention? What do you think's happening?
Well, it can kind of depend on the situation. If you're just driving like along a highway and there's no like traffic or accidents and no really bad drivers, you don't need as much attention. But if there's a situation going on, then the situation will need your full attention to focus because you don't know what's happening, who's injured, or what's actually going on, or you have to be careful too of what's on the road. Next, thing you know, you hit a police roadblock by accident. Yeah,
Yes.
many things that can happen on the road.
So here's an interesting thing, Dr. Tim.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who doesn't have or didn't start out having good spatial skills, James sees lines very well. What I mean by that is, okay, coming from a driving background, you may see a course and you'll see the cones and you drive around them.
Yes.
James has a very, very good sight for lines and driving, and I found that extremely interesting given what his background was. So I think that a lot of work went into developing those skills, and they will serve him well.
Absolutely. And that's those visual perceptual skills and that proprioceptive body awareness skills kind of working together to understand your environment. And then you have to actually start to judge speed because of how many kilometers per hour you're going as you're driving the vehicle will impact how much quicker your decision making has to be based on that visual input, but also the tactile and the proprioceptive. Where do you feel your hands touching the wheel and how much do you feel it moving? Should you move it a lot? Should you move it just a small amount? And that's all essential OT skills that you worked on when you were, 10 years old, is strengthening those lower level skills, the tactile, the vestibular, the proprioception. And that way you can then apply them to more complex skills and essentially should not need as much training, shouldn't need as much practice. But as you practice, just like what happened with imagery, and you're getting better and better at doing creative writing, you then should see that the skills get stronger and stronger such the demand of attention gets less and less because it's less effortful. It becomes more automatic. So much so that your mom probably doesn't think but about 10% of how much work she has to do to drive versus when she first learned to drive, back when she was a teen. Then it took this much attention. Now it takes about this much because of so much more practice that's gone into it.
What's interesting in all of this is that as a mother, I would be worried when James starts to drive. But I'm not actually. I am so confident that I've already said to James, next year when school starts, You'll drop your brother to school. He's just round the corner. You will drive and go to school. We've already made all those arrangements because I am so confident that he will handle himself well. I think when you come from a background of struggle and you understand what goes into paying a little more attention, having a little more focus, I think that you are also safer on the road. So I've spoken to quite a few parents recently who expressed reservations about their children driving. And my advice to them was send them to do a defensive driving course, which we'll send James to do, and get them out there because it's a life skill. It's something you need,
Yes.
And I am so confident in James going out there and managing himself. It is interesting. There are no reservations, none.
Fantastic. And would you say that was how you felt when he was 8?
Not at all.
And what's different?
I could see the difference in, the play park, how you drive the little buggies in the play park. And then I saw the difference after the Morris Center because Five Islands Amusement Park opened. Yes. And they had the cars. You remember that?
Yeah, go-karts.
And I had the go-karts.
Yes.
And I held my heart in my hand the first time. No, I was terrified. I did not want James to go. No, seriously. I was absolutely terrified. Haven't seen his performance before in the little buggies, and James was perfect. So that to me was extremely interesting. And you see, these skills, it's not just about the reading or the writing or the understanding. It's about the developmental tools that he was given for the life skills,
Right.
I'm seeing marksmanship, yes.
And what we talk about as well is when you look at the OT's developmental pyramid, it's an upside down triangle. And at the bottom is those 8 sensory input systems that you're using to begin to build the tactile with the visual, with the proprioceptive, with the fine motor and the gross motor, all working together. And as they go up that developmental pyramid, when you get to the top, it's now you can adapt to the demands of the sport. You can adapt to the demands of the activity. You can adapt to the demands of the social communication. And the top of their chart has a French phrase. It says joie de vivre. And the theoretical perspective is when you've got all those skills and you know that those skills are building up, then we get to a point to where you know that you've got all of the abilities to adapt to any environment that you come across. And that's why joie de vivre just means the joy of life. You now have much more joy in life because you can adapt to the lecture that's more visual than auditory. You can adapt to the lecture that's more auditory than visual. You have more job occupational choices because you can adapt to them because you have more strengths. And so there's a big push in the developmental field now not to follow this pyramid, but instead just to focus only on the skills that the child has that already are strong and not try to work on their weaker skills. And there's a huge problem with that. That means if you stop trying to work on the weaker skills, their peers are going to keep building those skills. So the gap that already started is now just going to get bigger and bigger. And that child's going to be farther and farther behind on those weaker skills because it'll be an even larger gap. Because if you do not work on weaker skills, the brain cannot make them any better. And that's the opposite of James. What you did was you took on the challenge to work with a team of professional brain scientists. Brain scientists in the field that you were exposed to was occupational therapy, the sensory motor specialist, the body regulation, energy, attention focus specialist, the speech therapists or the language experts in verbal skills and listening skills and precursors to writing. And then the clinical psychologist is the expert in mood and attention and anxiety and regulation and how you even talk to yourself about how you think you're going to do. If you give yourself a growth mindset, they now call it, of I think I can do this, I know I can try, I'm going to do my best, you give yourself a better chance of being more successful. So part of what you help exemplify, James, with all of your accomplishments is if we take the weaker skills and make them stronger, you have more control to do what you want to do at your true IQ level. Because one thing no clinic can do, not a Morris Center clinic or anybody else, we actually cannot train your skills any higher than your IQ level. Your IQ level is kind of like the bar we're aiming for. We can get up to that bar, but we will not go past it. And so there's two funny things I say to most kids. And James, I probably said it to you when you were 10, but you may not remember, which is we would say, well, you know your learning struggles. You know who's at fault for you having learning struggles. Any idea, James, who we going to tell you is at fault for your learning struggles?
Mm.
Sounds odd to ask that question, right? Well, here's the answer. They're genetic. You just have got to blame mom and dad. It's just genetics. They
I
gave you.
knew that was coming.
But guess what? We're going to save mom and dad because guess who mom and dad get to blame?
The
Yes.
grandpa.
Grandma and grandpa. So, the picture is our genetics give us all strengths and weaknesses. But the genetics of dyslexia do not give everybody with dyslexia superpowers. That's nonsense. There's no proof of that. There's no science that says every dyslexic's a better out-of-the-box thinker. There's no science that says every person with dyslexia or everyone with a language disorder is better at empathy. What it says is you worked on some of these skills despite your dyslexia or despite your language problem, and you made those skills stronger because of the practice you were doing was working, so you kept doing it. But what if we could take all of the weaker skills you had and make them stronger? Then what we have, James, is we have you. We have the man who's so highly ranked in chess, who's such an expert marksman, has won many trophies. You're an expert in your Cubs and your, gosh, I forgot the new name for it because you're too old for Cubs now. What do they call that?
Scouts.
Scouts, thank you. You're scouts. You've done water polo. And tell me about French. What kind of award did you win in French? Because many parents have big reservations about their child who had a diagnosis of dyslexia, let alone, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to give the list here. Your diagnosis was much more than dyslexia. We'll review it again because it was ADHD. It was specific learning disorder in reading, which is dyslexia. It was specific learning disorder in mathematics. It was specific learning disorder in written expression. It was a language disorder. It was social pragmatic communication difficulties. It was specific developmental disorder of motor functions. But guess what? If we retest you today, odds are the majority of those diagnoses no longer apply because you've made such progress. But tell us about French. What was the award you got in French? Because many parents are very worried that their child already struggled to learn English. Let's not give them a second language. How did you do in French?
I got the Delph A1. I got what I passed for it. For it.
So James has a little French story. He would like to at some point go to France to study at a university there.
Fabulous.
And but children like James generally are not great with languages, and it's a lot of struggle. So what was interesting is that James wanted to do French in Form 4, but his school didn't offer it because he was the only student who wanted to do French. So he opted to put himself in a program at Alliance Française. He gave up his Saturdays and he put himself in a program to get, it's called DELF, and it's an international accreditation for French. So any French university you go to will accept that. It's like you are a French speaking person.
Wow.
So he actually put himself in the program, went to class every Saturday, and did the DELF A1 exam. Now, it's some of the grades in like the oral was better than the written or things like that because they're different components.
Oh, yes.
And it's a direct reflection on how well he would do in some of the things based on how he is. But it's interesting because he did pass and he's going to go on to do A2. And I found that was, I don't know if as a teenager, I would have put myself through that struggle to do that. And I have the greatest respect for James for doing it.
Certainly, James, you have a long history of determination. Why do you think that is? Why are you so determined? And how does that relate to the strengths that you have today that you didn't have before?
Well, before I would say I'm not struggling, I was trying to, because I wanted to do well, because I wanted to impress my mom and dad. I wanted to show that I can do well in these things. So no matter how hard it is, the subject may be, I'll try and work on it and try and do well in it, because I want to be able to show that not only can I do well, but I am confident in this. That's one of the reasons, because it's not just to impress my parents, also for my own self, to prove that I can do far more than I think.
Fantastic. And you're actually looking right now and see your Delphi A1 certificate of competence, which, as your mother explained to our viewers, means that you will be accepted at any university that focuses on French, of recognizing the level of expertise you've developed in the French language. And
Yes, he
here's,
has to continue on. That's the A1 level, but it's a process, it's a journey. So,
yes. Oh, fantastic. And here's what many folks struggle to understand is the work you do with developmental scientists like myself as a neuropsychologist and neuro rehab trained neuropsychologist as well, is we are looking to figure out what is the language system's foundation in the brain. What really builds your phonological processing, your ability to hold on to words, split them apart, judge changes in sounds, sound words out for reading, sound words out for spelling. How does the brain build that skill? And two pioneers in language, Patricia Conway Lindemood and Charles Lindemood, built a program in 1969 that was focused on the neurology of phonological awareness. And they focused on that all the data back then, and even more so today, told us that the speech processing language system is part visual, it's part acoustic, that's half of it. But the other part is touch, movement, and movement of the mouth. We call it oral tactile and oral kinesthetic. Those are the four parts. So all the Morris Center did was work to rewire those four parts, and we used English as the language to practice, that neural rewiring. But when it's done, you now have a speech processing engine per se that is going to actually help you learn French or learn German or learn Russian or learn any language you want to learn, because those same four processing parts of the language system are necessary to learn any language that you learn. Because in every language of the world, you speak it first and you learn to read and spell it later. So this helps folks understand too, when parents get caught up in phonics programs, they're at the wrong level. Phonics is a level 2. That's a written language system. Phonics are not the cause of dyslexia problems. All of the predictive research or the developmental research says that your language problems come from the speech processor and your oral phonological awareness, your ability to perceive sounds, judge sounds in words, and be able to tell if the sounds have made 5 changes. Did we add a sound, take away a sound, substitute, shift, or repeat a sound? So when training that neurology first just with English, we know it then empowered your brain processor or your language processor to learn Spanish or to learn, in your case, French. Now, uniquely, when we work with students who are bilingual, we only do the work in one language. And right now it's only English. We're about 85% away in our conversion of actually be able to deliver that Now Foundations program for speech, language, reading, and spelling. We'll be able to deliver that Now Foundations program in Spanish fairly soon.
Okay,
But right now we just do it in English. But if you're bilingual, English and Spanish, we've seen students come into the Morris Center clinics, get tested in English, and we see the dyslexia in English. Poor reading skills in English, poor spelling in English, poor writing in English, dysgraphia too. And we have testing from the Spanish psychologists, say like in Mexico City, and they had the same performance on Spanish. We only did the treatment program in English to rewire that phonological processor and its application to reading and spelling. And then when they went back to Mexico City and they got retested in Spanish, all the scores on Spanish were just as high as the scores were now in English. And we'd made 6 grade levels of gain in empowering their English reading skills. And we saw the same gains in their reading of Spanish, but we didn't do 1 minute of Spanish instruction. So I think, James, you're a great example of how when you change those underlying processors, we strengthen those brain's ability to do language skills, imagery skills, motor skills, regulation and attention. You then have unlocked that foundation that you can use from to build higher level skills. James, let's pretend we have a boy watching who's 16. What would you tell him about what's possible to change his skills? Because many people think if you have a dyslexia or a dysgraphia or dyscalculia, that those are lifelong. Those are never going to change. What would you say to that person?
what I would say is that you can change. Just because you have it doesn't mean that it will stay. You can change and you can actually strengthen your abilities in that field. Because it doesn't mean that just because you have it that that you're not going to do well as such. You can do stuff to help not only deal with it, but also to help kind of improve and turn it from a disadvantage to an advantage. So it's not whole.
Fantastic. Sorry. And Mom, what would you say to the parent of that child? Because many parents are like, no, we've tried every program. We've tried this phonics program and this OG program, even though most of them have no science that backs them up as being highly effective. None of the OG programs have any science to say they're highly effective. They're highly popular because the International Dyslexia Association was originally the Orton Society. And so they just promote Orton programs. So there's a big propaganda marketing machine called the IDA that makes parents think OG programs would be most successful, but all the research says phonics programs are not as successful as what James did, which is a speech to print approach, working on the speech processing first, going to the phonics second, and then going to the irregular words and on up from there. So what would you say to parents who are struggling with, can my child work through these skills and make them stronger, or should I be looking for a dyslexia school that's just not going to put much emphasis on their weaknesses and is only going to focus on their strengths?
With the understanding that I have now, I know that the phonics and things like that, that's not the way to go. What you want is a holistic program. And I think that's what you offered to us at the Morris Center. And that's what benefited James tremendously. The language, it also translates not just into foreign language understanding, but also I thought into music as well, because James plays guitar and he's written grade 1 and 2 theory out of Royal School. I've seen the benefits of it. But Dr. Tim, I have to say that working on the weaknesses alone or just improving the strengths, that's not what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. What you're looking for, again, I come back to, is something holistic, where all the areas can be developed, because some of those competencies are going to be needed when they are older. They may not be needed now, it depends on the age of the child, but certainly when they are older. And I think that you all gave James that one-stop shop that enabled him to improve in all those different areas.
I think it's a really important message for parents to hear. And James, let me put some numbers behind what your mom just said, because we tested you before you started the work at the Morris Center with a high quality professional grade testing, like about 20 hours of it. And then we tested you again when the work was done. And looking just at your OT skills, your visual processing skills were at about the 20th percentile, which means 80% of kids your age had better visual perceptual skills. But just several months later, your visual perceptual skills are at the 75th percentile, which is much closer to your IQ. So you closed that gap by 50 percentile points in your visual perceptual skills. They also did some work on your motor skills, and we saw that your motor skills likewise went from about the 20th percentile to the 50th percentile, and some of those visual motor pencil and paper skills. And we know from our research that when you've done those kind of improvements, that as you keep using the skills, they just continue to get stronger and stronger. Now, in your language processing, your key phonological skills, what we call phoneme elision, that's the number one predictor of reading skills at age 5. If you struggle with phoneme elision and we don't get the right intervention at that speech to print kind of approach, you're not going to be a good reader at age 9, and most likely you're going to get diagnosed with a reading disorder. And you came in about the 20th percentile in that phoneme elision, and within a few months you were at the 50th percentile. And in other aspects of it, you were at the 63rd percentile. And then in one other aspect, which was phonological working memory, can you hold on and manipulate 2-syllable words, 3-syllable words, 4-syllable words, even 5-syllable words? You were now at the 90th percentile when we finished, and you came in at the 40th percentile. So again, you made 50 percentile points gain in several months. So when we talk about empowering dyslexia or empowering dysgraphia or dyscalculia or language disorders or all those learning difficulties, we're talking about changing those skills on par with your IQ. And then you're more in charge of what you're going to do, because even your speech pathology testing showed that some of your core language skills came in at about the 30th percentile, which is just the low end of average, but you're above the 50th percentile when you finished. And we see those skills get even stronger because some of them actually, just your verbal expressive language skills, you raise them from the 20th percentile to the 75th percentile, and how well you could verbally explain something, how well you could actually put sentences together, how well you could remember and say sentences back to us, how well you could actually take a picture and a few words and make a sentence out of it. We call that your ability to formulate sentences. And then we went even further and began to look at your academic skills because we knew those were struggles for you early on. And we saw that your reading skills, you could sound out words, but it wasn't very efficient for you. You were at about the 45th percentile. But when you finished, you were at the 85th percentile. You'd made 40 percentile points gain in your ability to easily and accurately sound out words. And that means now that we've put you on the trajectory of continuing to use those skills, build those skills, and then do what you've just done, James, you've become a dyslexia success story. So I thank you both for the time with us today. We thank the parents who joined in and viewed, and the comments from Deputy Agata and others about how strong you've done and what a great example you are to others. And we really appreciate your time of sharing your dyslexia and learning difficulty success with our viewers here today on Dyslexia Success Stories. Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much, Lynette. Have a lovely day in Trinidad.
Thank you for having us.